Welcome to this Roll for Crit expansion review. Today, we're going to take a look at an expansion for Detective, a modern crime board game called LA Crimes. If you don't know what the original base is, we have a review for it. It's a detective story game which has you go through a certain number of cases to solve a crime. We really liked it. It was in both our top 10s for the last year. This is expansion for it. It's sort of a standalone in that sense. It's a whole new case line that takes place in LA, has the title, but it also takes place in the 80s, meaning that you will not have all the fancy gadgets you had in the previous base game, so you'll have to rely on your own wit and maybe bend the law a little in order to bring justice to the criminals.
Yeah, for the most part, it still works the same way that base game played. You are going to be looking at these cards, flipping them over. Each card will tell you something, and you might make a decision. You might learn some information. You might get a clue. Probably it'll lead you to more things that you can explore and discover. And it still uses a computer database via a website that they provide you. Now, this is the 80s, so it doesn't look as nice as it used to, but most of the functionality is roughly the same. There are a couple new things that this game brings to the table, besides obviously 3 brand new cases that are totally new. There are some new characters that you can play as. There are some new options you might have. Some cards might tell you to make a decision now, which means you're going to have 3 or maybe 2 or 4 options that you can choose. Some of them may require you to spend a token, what have you, but you have to decide as soon as you read that. You're also going to be able to do things that will take place at a later time. For instance, you might have someone followed and put a marker at a future time to remind you that at this time you're going to read a card to tell you what the person found out who was following that suspect. Other than that, for the most part, same basic setup, same basic gameplay flow, but of course, in the 80s. The idea behind this one is you're detectives and there's kind of this political scandal going on. Like in the first game, the 3 cases are connected in a campaign, so you can't just play them. They're not standalone. And you also need the original base too. This doesn't come with all the components that you need.
Right. This came with pretty much the cases, the detectives that you actually are supposed to play with, of course, the board, and these tokens and stuff all came from the base set. We should mention, because it's the 80s and you don't have all the fancy gadgets, you actually don't use the computer tokens.
Right.
And in the last set, you could write a report anywhere to get these authority tokens, I believe they're called. In this one, you can only do it at the police station, which why this character who lets you write it anywhere becomes a little bit more helpful.
Yeah, they made it a little bit more challenging, and I suppose it makes sense because it's the 80s. You don't have like a phone you can just write a report on. You have to be at the base, I suppose. Adds a little bit more challenge to things. This is also a double-sided board. You use the other side specifically for the third case.
Yep.
That just mixes things up a little bit, which is always kind of exciting. Like in the first game, there's one case in particular that really mixed things up that I'm thinking of, but we're not going to talk about that today. So I feel like with this game, talking about an expansion, most of the discussion kind of is about the story itself, right? Because I think for the most part, the gameplay is the same. Well, I did really like that addition of the surveillance thing where you could follow people.
I do, and in particular, I liked it more because there were a couple of times in the lab, instead of wasting 3 hours, it was, you get a report in 5 hours, so you can do other things.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
But I will say I'm a little disappointed because I don't think it came up as much as I would like. Maybe it's because there's only 3 cases. If you had 5, we'd maybe get enough of that taste of the make this decision and or surveilling people. Could also be just somehow we avoided it all.
Right. Each case has about 35. I think it's 35 or 36, including this top one. Cards
maybe we
in
see
it.
half of them.
Yeah. So it's possible that you take a path that's very different from ours. But yeah, I didn't feel like it really felt like even in the first case we saw more of it. In cases 2 and 3, it kind of dropped off. So hard to say for sure if that's just our bad luck on our part. We haven't looked through the rest of the cards to see. We don't want to spoil anything. We might want to play it again in the future. But your mileage may vary on that front. One of my biggest kind of, really my complaint about the first game was there were some aspects of the story and writing that I felt like were pretty dry, that didn't catch my interest a ton. That's kind of why, it's the only reason that game wasn't higher on my list. What did you think about this story versus that original one? Obviously it's shorter.
It is shorter, but I like this one a little bit more because I think you got more, I don't know if they actually delved into it more, or it just felt like the characters are a bit more, and like the ones even your own police chief. I felt like it had a bit more animated. It could also be they suggest that you play a soundtrack or something beforehand. After finding out many detective movies we know don't take place in the 80s, I believe we landed on Lethal Weapon.
You got to be period appropriate.
Of course.
It's wrong to play anything else. So that's a fun aspect. Yeah, I think I liked some parts of it better and some parts of it maybe not as much. I like I said, this one has more of a political angle to it, which I thought was an interesting way to go. I do think it's hurt a little bit by only being 3 cases in that they can't give you, it's harder for them to build up as much and really like have big setups and payoffs later on.
Right.
And it's also a little bit like maybe they feel like, oh, we don't want to have one case that's too crazy because you're only getting 3, so you want to go in this direction. I also thought that this one maybe seemed, I don't know if it was just me, but a little bit more lenient. I didn't feel as much as in the first one that we were missing, like, oh, there's 5 or 6 things I wish we could do, but maybe it's just since we played that original one, we're more experienced and we kind of know.
Well, I think a part of it for that is in the previous one, and because you have the technology, your score is also based on evidence. And this, because you don't have all that, like,
right.
Even though we missed some evidence, it was like we missed 3 out of 4, like instead of like 4 out of 6 or 4 out of 10 or something.
Yeah, right. There are still fingerprints and things like that you can find, but it's harder, I guess.
Yeah, it seems more based on your own gut feelings.
Right.
I think actually building a case.
Yeah, it did seem like maybe there were some more options too, where things would happen where you could spend a token and some time to do things kind of like the proper legal way, or you could take more of a risk, maybe get a stress token. And
I don't think we ever took the proper legal way. Because usually it was like spend 5 authority and lose 4 hours. And we're just like, no, we'll just break in.
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of like gathering evidence and stuff, I've seen other people say some cases, and this happens a lot with these types of games, like any of these like Sherlock Holmes or Chronicles of Crime, where depending on how you play or how the way your group thinks, you might come across something where you think that it was like really obvious or way too obscure. I felt like, again, for us, it kind of landed. I mean, there were a couple things we got wrong. For the most part, I feel like we did pretty well in our personal journeys. But for the most part, I feel like they laid out the clues at a pretty good medium level of like not too obvious, but not too difficult.
Yeah, no, I think the leaps that we had to make weren't very large. I felt like the other case I had to make some more bigger assumptions or something.
Yeah. So
like, even though I know there's one thing I misread, but I felt like maybe if I read a couple cards differently or something, I don't think it was them as much as me just assuming something. But we'll have to see. The one other thing I do want to comment though is the last case. There's a bit of confusion about how some of the rules work because they don't really bring it up in there, and even online, I think they say this is overtime, but they don't clarify what that means.
Right, yeah. There were some things we were confused about in that last case. Yeah, the rules didn't tell us what to do, so
we came up with 3 different ways to interpret it.
It seemed like there should have been a new rule, but they never said there was. So strictly going by the rule book, you would just play the way you normally would. A little hard to talk about it without spoiling it. Really, it's honestly not that spoilery, but regardless, we won't go into it. So yeah, that's a little bit annoying, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that sometimes comes to the territory of Portal Games rule books. But overall, I mean, I don't know. I did not love these cases. I will say that. I don't feel like it still is the same thing where I think if you didn't like the tone of the original Detective, this doesn't change it up too much. It still very much has that aspect of the bureaucracy and the drinking coffee and the waiting around and stuff like that. So if that turned you off at all, I don't think that you will be as into this, which is kind of the part that turned me off, but it still does have the core system, which I still think is very strong. I just now, after this, really want to see what they have said is coming, which is other designers and other writers, and I would like to see what other different types of people can bring to this format.
Well, the 2 things I'm curious about is, one, do you want another set that's 3 cases all tied together? Or would you rather have something that comes with another 3, but each one is its own standalone?
It's hard because 3 cases seems like a nice balance, but yeah, maybe it would be cool to just have one that was like, $10 and you get just a case. Like, I think that would be maybe a nice, because really, they don't need to give me like these new characters or any kinds of new components, just this deck. Really, and you can use the same board unless they decide to go to, a different time period again, which maybe could be interesting, but I don't think that they need to do that. I think it's fine to just, here's a deck, 35 cards, $10, $15 even. I'm happy to, just slot that in. I think that would be cool. Even if they were connected, maybe they just sell them piece by piece or something. For our expansion videos, we give an expansion one of 3 ratings, I suppose you could call them. Either pass, try it, or buy it. So 3 levels of how committed we are to this. This is a tough one for me, honestly. That's definitely not a pass. I think I gotta say try it. Like I said, if you didn't love the original, you won't love this. But if you did love the original, then I think you definitely should pick it up, because you're going to get, for the most part, more of what you love, but you may find some missteps here and there for your mileage. For me, I'm mostly thinking about the future expansions, and I just want to see them do something a little bit different and more interesting for my taste in terms of the storyline of it, the actual plot and the characters and stuff.
I feel it's a little hard to rate this, partly because it's not like, oh, this expansion adds this to the game or these new mechanics. It almost feels like a standalone product. You just need the base for the pieces. So I think I enjoyed the story a little bit more than you did. So I'm going to put in to buy it, but only because I like Detective. I thought that's definitely one you enjoy. And if you enjoy it, then I do think you'll still have a lot of fun with this. I do like the new mechanics. I wish they used them a little bit more. And maybe if we're lucky, they'll keep using them on for future things, which means this would be a great way to introduce someone to them. I still thought it was a fun case, and if you don't like the 80s either, then maybe avoid that too. But it really just comes down to, do you like the base Detective? I think is really the rating to go on. If you did, then yeah, this is probably something you could enjoy. Yeah. If not, then why are you still watching?
And maybe this is a sunk cost fallacy, but it's like, well, if you have the original Detective and you even liked it a little bit, like, you might as well add something else onto it, or if your group liked it,
We'll also say that this does fit into the base box, so in case you're curious, without, I don't think, too much finagling, which is nice.
Yeah, that is nice. Yeah, I think there's even still more room in there. Probably.
I think you could probably fit maybe a couple.
We still have the insert in there, so actually.
Assuming with the insert,
there's not too many components. All right, so LA Crimes is the expansion. It is available now, but we'd like to hear what you think in the comments down below. Maybe you have some spoilery thoughts. You could mark those spoilers and talk about that kind of thing in the comments. We'd love to hear that.
What soundtrack did you listen to?
Yeah, tell us what music you decided to listen to while you played the game. We'd like to hear from you. Otherwise, you can catch us on social media and everything else, linked in our description down below. Thank you for watching. This has been our review. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this is Roll for Crit.
Get an inspiration token by supporting us on Patreon and liking and subscribing to this channel.
If you support us on Patreon, you'll get access to our audio expansion podcast. It's so good.